Hello and welcome everyone to this main WISE panel by Al-Fakhoura and Silatech, of course. First, this is not going to be really a panel. It's going to be a marathon of ideas, as we have 6 panelists who promised us they will give us concise and brief answers to our questions, and thank you for that in advance. And they will try to give of their expertise and knowledge to answer this very important question: how do we bridge the gap between education and meaningful employment? And this is why this panel is by Al-Fakhoura and Silatech together, who are very happy to work together for the first time, as I understood, as they are both committed to the SDG goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, for those of you who were surprised by the term, like myself, a couple of years ago, set by the UN for 2030, mainly the goal of quality education and decent employment. What does it mean? Most of the humanitarian and education work in crisis areas, which are full in our MENA region, they focus usually on primary and secondary education, but they fail to address higher education. This is where Al-Fakhoura comes in with a holistic program and support for higher education students. They so far managed to help 9,000 students across the MENA region, which I'm sure for you all agree that it's no longer actually a luxury. But what is education for if you will end up being part of the 25% youth unemployment in the MENA region? It's considered one of the highest numbers in the world. It's really 25%, a number that is projected to rise when we start having all the data from the COVID-19 layoffs. I'm going to tell you a very quick story. In February, I was in a refugee camp in Lebanon, and I was actually working on this very amazing volunteer teacher who is passionate about giving education to those kids in the refugee camps who are even in a worse condition after the COVID-19 procedures and closing. And one of the kids didn't want to go in her tent. And I told him, "You don't want to go and learn?" And he was like, "Why should I learn?" I said, "Because you need to get a job later and you need to go to the university." And he told me, "And what did university do to her? She's in the same refugee camp as me." And this question actually really shook me, because seriously, how could I convince this child? He has a living example in front of him of someone who went to university and ended up in a refugee camp just like him. She came from a very decent family, well-off condition, and she finds herself in poverty just like him. This is where Silatech actually comes in. This is where they give with their programs meaningful and holistic approach with methodologies that work towards direct job placement and enterprise development for youth, because a sustainable livelihood, breaking out of a poverty cycle, does not happen with jobs that are just providing food on the table. It happens with long-lasting jobs where you can actually flourish, where you can actually expand and advance. I'm going to tell you the story of my own personal family. My mother and father actually never finished high school. They are from the generation of war in Lebanon. And when the war ended, they just had to figure out ways to feed us. Some days we were poor, some days we were rich, but it was never constant. It was never sustainable. And this is how it caused, at the heart of the same family, discrepancy between myself and my siblings. I managed to reach higher education. They didn't, because the jobs that my father was in were never stable enough. This is where Silatech comes in to give meaningful, decent, long-lasting, sustainable jobs. Before we start with the panel, let's hear from our keynote speakers. We have Filippo Grande from UNHCR, because when we think of crisis and conflict zones, we think of refugees, of course. And I don't know if you know that now we have a maximum 5% of refugees who have access to higher education. Only 2 years ago, it was 1%. So now we have 1 out of 20 refugees who have access to higher education, which is still not a lot. Let's hear from Filippo Grande.
My thanks to the Chief Executive Officer of Silatec, Hassan Al-Mulla, for extending the invitation to join you here at WISE. UNHCR, the UN Refugee Organization, which I lead, is mandated to protect and assist the more than 84 million people forcibly displaced around the world today due to conflict, violence, discrimination, and persecution. Unfortunately, while humans have become experts at making war, we do not have the same proficiency at making peace. Amongst other deadly consequences, this leaves tens of millions of people uprooted from their homes for long periods of time as they await political solutions to protracted conflicts. But as we know, children and youth development does not wait for politicians to sort out such problems. It is therefore critical that these displaced children and youth also have the same opportunities to learn, grow, develop, and make the most of their potential as all other children and youth. Key to this is access to quality education and inclusion in national programs. Over the past years, UNHCR has worked tirelessly with our partners to expand refugee education and support host countries in including the displaced into national systems. Through this multifaceted cooperation with host governments, donors, including the private sector, international financial institutions, and others, we have made progress. For example, we have increased the percentage of refugees in tertiary education from just 1% a handful of years ago to 5% now. While this is very far from our goal, our collective gains are laudable and we should be proud. But these gains are fragile and we must all deepen our resolve to ensure improved access to education and opportunity for refugees. We see education, and especially higher education, as a key element to expanding opportunity and self-reliance. This is why we, along with many of our partners, have set a target to expand access to higher education to 15% of young refugees by 2030. This is indeed ambitious, but achievable. Yet, we cannot do it alone and need a whole of society effort as envisaged in the Global Compact on Refugees to make that happen. With the many other pressing priorities, some may think we could deprioritize investment in education, but this would be a disaster for not only the children and the youth, but also for refugee and host communities, as well as countries of origin where a returning educated population will be needed to help rebuild countries and communities. By being here today, you are already committed to the promotion of education, but I also hope that you will come away from the many important discussions with a renewed resolve and a list of actions that can be taken to further refugee education and inclusion, so that together we can expand and enhance the quality and inclusiveness of national education systems, facilitate broader access to skills and higher education for refugee and host community youth, and can support a transition to meaningful employment, enabling them to thrive. Thank you for your support.
Education is not only a problem of refugees. especially in the MENA region. I don't know if you know the numbers, but this region is hosting 25% of displaced people around the world, 25% of 82 million refugees around the world, in countries that are already not in the best condition, and high rates of poverty. And so we have to understand also the weight it has on marginalized communities in those countries. When we talk about that, and when we add on top of it the impact of COVID-19, we really have to echo what Filippo Grande said, and we have to be proficient in times of peace. And this is where I welcome on stage the acting CEO of Qatar Development Bank, Mr. Abdurrahman As-Suwaidi, who is also the chairman of the board directors at Elan and Qatar Business Incubation Center, as well as Bidaya Center for Entrepreneurship and Career Development. From all these titles, I'm sure you understand why he's here to tell us about what opportunities we have. Please.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to be here with you today as we navigate together a new path for our youth to gain enhanced access to a meaningful education that expands their avenue of growth and connect them to a broader spectrum of opportunities for self-actualization, community development, and societal transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, with UNESCO announcing the disruption of the education of 90% of the world's school-age children due to the pandemic, the International Labour Organization estimating it has caused the loss of 114 million jobs in 2020. And the OECD saying it has made 22 million jobs in advanced economies vanish. The picture becomes quite clear. But beyond the countless indices and statistical indicators that warn of the serious consequences of inaction lies a golden opportunity to reclaim the future of underprivileged youth and marginalized communities around the world. With the continuous efforts of key players across domain and borders, which sets the context of why we are here today. It's indeed a collaborative platform for a deserving cause. Like the WISE Summit and the outcome from its session and discussion that plant the seed for strategic alliances and action plans that create hope, possibility, and concrete change. This means that we are not faced by a question of if, but how. How we can join forces to lay down and, more importantly, set into motion the necessary action to connect young men and women with knowledge, technologies, and resources that not only level the playing field for the underserved, but provide every one of our youth with the empowerment and resilience to amplify their role as an agent of change, breaking the cycle of poverty where present, and securing a thriving and abundant future for their communities just the same. Having been at the heart of youth empowerment and enterprise development for the last quarter of a century, we have seen firsthand at QDB that the advancement of our entrepreneurship, SME, and innovation ecosystems is one of the key ways to serve this end. The case for entrepreneurship is both quite evident and multidimensional. Entrepreneurs and SME catalyze socio-economic transformation in numerous ways. They are more often the ones to alleviate poverty and improving living standard in their social circles, create jobs in the short and long terms, fulfill unmet needs in their communities, accelerate infrastructural change, and enable balanced regional development, help initiate a chain of wealth creation and sharing, and they are spur economic growth by adding to the GDP and per capita incomes, not to mention their own self-realization and achieving of a sense of accomplishment. Through this lens, all players in the business and education ecosystem, from public and private institutions to educators and policymakers, should aim to work in unison towards creating synergies that provide young men and women from all backgrounds with improved access to the financial support, education, resources, and capacity building platforms, and should also provide the guidance they need to regain hope, exercise their creative potential, and curve their paths to prosperity and abundance for themselves, their communities, and the world at large. It is this dynamic, ladies and gentlemen, that can help reverse a potentially imminent domino effect back to a positive direction. With this in view, QDB passionately welcomes the idea and creative thoughts of all participants in the WISE Summit and our panel discussion today. QDB is keen to work alongside our partners, stakeholders, and all actors in the relevant ecosystems towards developing initiative and action plan to turn this point in time into a spark for positive impact and lasting change. Dear guests, I would like to thank each and every one of you for choosing to be part of this great cause. And I would like to thank Education Above All and Salatic for organizing this important panel discussion as part of the 10th edition of the WISE Summit, and for creating a common space where we can all meet and develop solutions for positive transformation, as well as for creating initiatives that continue to benefit our youth in the region and beyond, including Salatic Al Fakhura, which serve as a model of success for other institutions to follow, and many more. I wish you all a productive and fruitful exchange, and I look forward to carrying this conversation forward with all of you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much, Mr. As-Suwaidi. Now I start to call our dear panelists with Mr. Yannick Du Pont, founder and director of Spark, which supports growth-oriented small-medium enterprises, SMEs, and facilitates youth job creation in fragile states. Please come on stage. This will be a 35 minutes panel discussion, and then we will take your Q&As, and we promise we're going to make it as dynamic as possible. I also invite Ms. Maha Haidar, Director of MasterCard Scholarship Program at the American University of Beirut, who focuses on facilitating access to education, particularly for marginalized and minority youth. We also have with us Dr. Husna Ahmad, OBE, the CEO of Global One 2015, which is a faith-based international NGO focused on women. Ms. Ahmad works on so many fronts for women in faith and environment. We also please, our last panelist here present with us is Mr. Brahim As-Safadi, his CEO and co-founder of Luminous Group, who offers education and is also an incubator of startups. And since May this year, Mr. As-Safadi developed a super revolutionary digital model that will change education, and we'll be hearing about it more. We also have online with us from New York. I'm just checking if we have her or not. Ms. Tamina Akhtar, yes, we do have them, Senior Advisor at the UNDP Regional Bureau for Arab States with 25 years expertise in international development and in transformative economy. We also have from Madrid, Ms. Ana Martiningui, CEO of Education for Employment, focusing on North Africa and the Middle East, placing so far 3,000 of their graduates in the work field, and 58% of these graduates are women. So let's start. So I'm going to start with you, Mr. Yannick Du Pont, with the question about crisis. We always have refugees, but we also have local marginalized, as I said before. What do you think some of the skills both youth lack in order to have meaningful employment?
Thank you, and let me first, of course, thank also the organizers. And it's really wonderful, and this will also be going into my question, to see Silatec and Education Above All and Al Fakhura do this together. Because I think the link between higher education and jobs is extremely important and cannot be seen in isolation. So to get to your question, what we see, what we've learned in the last mostly 6 years, actually together with Qatar, the EU, the Dutch government, we actually announced in May with Her Highness Sheikh Hamoza and the Queen of the Netherlands, Maxima, the award of the 10,000 university scholarship to a Syrian and Palestinian refugee in the Middle East. So we've done this huge scholarship program. But we also analyzed, of course, the results and where we can still improve every year. So what are marginalized missing? Well, first we thought, and I think this is part of the answer, it's just a scholarship. But we realized that before you give a scholarship, we need to analyze the labor market. You need to start with the end goal, which is education is a means to an end. It's to self-fulfillment, but it's also to employment. So starting with the market, then determining which education will bring you there, and also looking now at Ibrahim, we worked a lot together. And what I love about Luminous is that's what you're doing. You know, you look at the employers and not just big titles, PhD, master. No, actually the employment is very often in higher TVET. So in really applied education. So that was one of the major changes we had in the program. We start doing a lot of more applied TVET. Also looking at soft skilling. So if you want to work for an employer, you need to know more than just technical skills, social skills, how you work skills. I mean, maybe finally, a big one is how to deal with the environment. So in a country like Turkey, it's going amazing. You know, we have really good cooperation with the government. Work permits are getting extended. In most countries we work in, Lebanon is more difficult. Marginalized communities have really a problem to get formal work or formal education. And then you need to also help them how to deal with this. So how to deal with working and living in a difficult environment. And finally, I would say, you know, really start with matching to the labor market and to jobs very early on. So people don't graduate with only a diploma.
I'm not laughing out of joy, of course. I'm laughing because it's my country. So it's sad. So it's a wrong expression of emotions always, I know. In complex geographies, now exacerbated with COVID-19, I'm going to the question with Ms. Tamina Akhtar from New York. How do UNDP, organizations like UNDP, tackle youth empowerment? And from your expertise, what kind of support do they look for from international organizations? My question goes for Tamina Akhtar.
Yes. Do you hear me, Rawaa?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Okay, thank you very much. So first of all, I would like to begin by thanking Silatech and thanking the organizers for inviting me to this very important panel today. The question is really, really relevant because we have currently in the Arab States region the largest cohort of young people between the ages of 15 and 29, about 110 million people. Young men and young women. So this is this cohort of young people is both an opportunity as well as it represents the need for development organizations and societies as a whole to do more to meet the aspirations of young people for jobs, for education, and for a better life. And also, young people are not a single entity. So I think just to start out, UNDP looks in a contextualized way at the needs of young people. They need support at different levels. Marginalized groups of young people need additional and targeted support to overcome adversity and to develop the skills to succeed in the economy. Young women face specific challenges. In many refugee areas in particular, there are challenges related to gender norms, there are challenges related to transportation, there are also challenges related to care work. So some of these have to be addressed in order to create those enabling conditions for these young people. The growing number of refugees and IDP youth, this was mentioned by Mr. Grande, it's a record number, which is a very sad record in the region today, and with many generations that are growing up in displaced circumstances. So specific educational opportunities, mentorship opportunities, employment opportunities need to be created for these youth in these contexts that can enable empowerment. I think the panel is also about COVID-19 and the recovery from COVID-19. So just to say that COVID-19 has created specific strains on opportunities for youth. This includes loss of educational continuity for many youth. It includes the lack of sufficient connectivity and also opportunities to connect remote schooling. It has created a loss in jobs. In many countries, we're seeing a rise of unemployment. For example, in Jordan, this affects new job seekers as well. Unemployment has reached 25% in 2021 in the first quarter alone. And youth unemployment rates are reaching an unprecedented 48.1%. And women's labor force participation at an all-time low at 14%. So these are some of the challenges that if a country like Jordan is facing this as a result of COVID, then many other countries are facing even worse challenges in the wake of COVID. However, there are also opportunities that may be thrown up by COVID. And in UNDP, we conducted an entrepreneurship programming support for 10 of our countries in the region. And it focused on behavioral barriers to successful entrepreneurship. And there were some interesting insights that it provided. First, that the nature of work has dramatically shifted during the pandemic. However, the gendered nature of access to technology in the Arab region means that women are disproportionately affected by these challenges. Approximately 51% of women, for example, in Iraq have access to internet compared to 98% of men. So this shows that we need to do much better in really narrowing the gap for women to enter, to benefit in societies and also to enter the job market.
Even in Egypt, actually, Ms. Akhtar, I was shocked to know that 50% of women in Egypt, which in comparison to Iraq is not a conflict zone area, 50% of women don't have access to internet. Mr. Brahim Al-Safadi, with this, you've been with Luminous Group working since 1999, so you witnessed the change in education, in the job market, in technology, and so on. Now, what from the side of students, I have students who I hear them say sometimes that they don't feel the necessity of education. They can just be famous online, and those who are in dire conditions, they just feel like they can do any job, low income, and that education is not going to get them anywhere. What is the importance of post-secondary and a varied post-secondary education, especially in the unique situation of refugees and marginalized youth in the MENA region?
Thank you first. My pleasure being here today. With what we've seen in the Arab world with a great vision, with tenacity, and despite all challenge, Qatar having the World Cup here, that encourage a lot of Arab youth of the potential of the Arab world. And I'm so happy that my students working, a lot of them, they will be working during that event. And today, what I have seen with this wisdom, with WISE conference that address topics that the first time I seen of wellness, sport, disrupt scale of education, and that is the core, I believe, of supporting generation can make really different. I'm gonna tell you a story. I'm a refugee. I'm a dropout from university. I arrived to Saudi Arabia, to Jordan at age of 18. I knew nobody in the country. And what we accomplished is 120,000 learners. We work with 33 donors, most of the donors that they work in my country, and we have raised 24,000 scholarships, 40% of them for women, and we have made high quality of education, importing the best practical with a partnership, high quality of education from Seattle, from UK, from all over the globe into Jordan, and we have simulated the workplace, and we have implemented this in partnership with the employers and with the support of the donor, and is for good for profit, is a very sustainable one. And we have generated many businesses I'm so proud of from my students, and we have created very good impact in the economy. And the last program we have brought to this, our country, was 6 months, and we guarantee 3 times minimum wage, no matter what your education background is, as a bootcamp model, which is started in the pandemic, because we have built a virtual college 3 years prior to pandemic. And the students, we give them job in the pandemic to work in the US remotely and all over the globe. That being said, we are hungry to make something at scale, getting inspiring people in this room, and His Excellency, the vision. I'm happy to tell you that we have created a model will address scale, impact, and we were going to build that will disrupt the education system. And we're going to build something very unique, globally unique, based in outcome and impact and transparency and clear expectation, which is leveraging the technology of today. We're going to build physical space and virtual space. We'll import the best practical knowledge to our hub and export it to our spokes, our physical space, and that will impact millions of youth, and especially women. Women, in my story, I came from a small city in Saudi Arabia, and I can see what happened with my sister because of women and empowerment. If I take this in my journey since I started, and today I have many thousands of stories of what women can do to the economy, to the family, to the globe with what you know. Thank you.
Thank you. We are definitely living better times for women and for women empowerment, but we are still facing barriers, including at least the data poverty, as I like to call it. But Dr. Hasna Ahmed, what are the barriers women face in what Ms. Akhtar called norm societies, and what can international organizations do to allow a change in the dynamic towards gender and education and employment?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Rawaa, Brother Hassan, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me to join this panel. As a British Bangladeshi woman and a mother of 3 daughters and 2 granddaughters, I'm very cognizant of the barriers facing our young women today in every aspect of their lives. Islamophobia is what we face in the UK on a daily basis, and this is not exclusive to the UK. This is the lived reality of most Muslims. However, the barriers one faces in the global north is quite different from the global south. We need to acknowledge that the world has changed, and this is our moment to define our aspirations for a planet we can be proud of, where inequality and injustice are removed and we save the planet from a climate catastrophe. I know that my sisters throughout the world have a vital role to play in the global stage. Their well-being is essential to the continued survival of humanity. Women invest around 90% of their income into their own households, including their children. This is 30 to 40% higher than men's investment in their own households. Women are also shown to be less risk-averse and more willing to change their habits. We need to guarantee their safety and security so they can flourish. Also, our brothers, fathers, husbands, sons and brothers are often part of the problem. This is why I have an issue with the term traditional values, which seems to infer that education of girls and women are not compatible with traditional values. A constant battle that we face is between religious beliefs and values as opposed to cultural and traditional values. We need to recognize that these are different. We are experiencing the ugly side of culture around the world due to COVID-19 and the displacement of communities through climate change. Women are facing increased domestic violence, early marriage, trafficking, and mental health issues. Is this our values? Is this our tradition? Culture in many parts of the world promotes patriarchy to an extent which is far removed from the teachings of Islam. The idea that a good education opens up the soul and brings one closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is central to Islam. Only those of his servants who are learned truly fear Allah. According to, this is Quran 35:28. According to Imam al-Ghazali, knowledge exists potentially in the human soul, like the seed in the soil. By learning, the potential becomes actual. This illustrates the fundamentally transformative nature of education from an Islamic perspective. So as a British Muslim woman working for the past couple of decades in the faith space, it's more and more evident to me that as a woman of faith, merely having a place at the table is not good enough. I agree with, thank you. I agree with a recent meme I've seen that we have to become the table. Why is that? Because unless we navigate the civic space, seize properly and turn challenges into opportunities, we'll always be pushing against the tide. I believe that institutions and networks have an enormous part to play in shaping both internal and external norms and cultures. And that's why I'm so happy and proud to be here at the WISE Summit, you know, and the leadership of EAA and Silatech. There are many diverse faith communities who are not engaged and are regarded as the other. Unless institutional changes are made, nothing will change. I believe that only systemic changes can be seen in, only by systemic change can we see a shift in, you know, gender dynamics. International institutions need to understand that 84% of the planet are adherents of a faith, and with the majority of them based in the South, in the global South, it's imperative that policy considerations on global health, education, skills, and jobs from a faith perspective are promoted. The Bretton Woods institutions, for example, have evolved a long way from the days of structural adjustments and development partnerships, but they, the World Bank and the IMF, need to become faith sensitive. They are much more transparent and accountable today, but they're still using the Western lens to find solutions, and without diversity and inclusion, they will fail. In the words of the Pope, the marketplace by itself cannot resolve every problem. The Pope, in his recent encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, which aims to promote a universal aspiration towards fraternity and social friendship, talks about the importance of popular movements today, which brings torrents of moral energy. That is what we need for our sisters. We have a moral imperative to promote a conducive environment which lets us live with dignity and self-respect whilst engaging in the economic development of our nations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. This is very inspiring and this is very challenging because we have a lot to do in that direction, and especially now in post-COVID-19 with everything more exacerbated. If we want to be inclusive, we have to also take this opportunity to give, to use it for the youth, for empowering the youth. So I take the question to Anna Martiningui. What methods have the international NGOs, private sector, government institutions, and the civil society implemented to support the education for employment, which has 58% of its graduate women, work to revitalize national economies through reskilling pathways and to be able to place those youth in jobs?
Hi, thank you, Rawaa. Thank you, Education Above All. Thank you, Silatech. Thank you, Mr. Hassan Amula. It's an honor to be here with you today, even if virtually. First, if you allow me, Rawaa, I'll just mention a little bit about our mission. So, because we work to create economic opportunities for underserved youth in the MENA. so they can create a brighter future for themselves, their families, and their communities. And to do that, we bridge the gap between education and employment. And as you mentioned, not only employment, but decent and sustainable employment. And the magnitude of the youth unemployment challenge, as Mr. Filippo Grande mentioned, it requires a concerted effort. There's not only one stakeholder that can do it alone. I mean, we all have to work together. And at EFE, we do have the privilege, so to speak, to work with all stakeholders. So, for example, we work with the private sector to identify jobs, skills needs, to design our programs, and of course to provide jobs for our graduates. We work with microfinance institutions to secure funding for entrepreneurship graduates. We work with local governments to align our programs with plans, initiatives, priorities. We work with employment agencies to identify candidates, with educational institutions, higher educational institutions or TVET institutions to align the curricula to market needs, with NGOs, like-minded CSOs and CBOs to foment youth's participation into our programs, because sometimes it's a question of also changing mindsets. And of course, we have many partners who support our programs, such as Silatech, with whom we have actually partnered together also with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to skill and reskill over 20,000 people in Morocco and connect more than 8,000 to decent jobs in the next 4 years. And hopefully soon we'll be implementing projects in other MENA countries like Yemen, focusing on both jobs and entrepreneurship. And as I mentioned about changing mindsets, I mean, another fundamental stakeholder here, it's a pillar, is youth themselves, the families, their communities. We have to show youth, we have to show families, brothers, sisters, the importance of a first job, the importance of including women, of giving youth possibilities, the possibilities offered by vocational professions of entrepreneurship. Because one thing for us is certain, we do believe that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. So we all have to work to make sure that young people have the skills that they need to access the opportunities that they deserve to build a future and contribute to their society and economy. It's only together that we have the power to change lives.
Talent is universal, but opportunities are not. So I take the question to Maha Haidar. When we usually, in crisis and conflict zones, we give a lot of opportunities, not enough, but a fair amount of opportunities for refugees in host countries, which heightens the tension between host communities and refugees. How would you suggest scholarship programs work to mitigate this issue?
Thank you so much for the question. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the organizers. According to UNHCR, we have around 26.6 million refugees globally, and only 15% among them are in developed countries. The rest are all in developing countries. Actually, I think 26 or 27% are in least developed countries. So the fact is that refugees often move to neighboring countries who likewise have weak infrastructures, weak systems, and this creates a pressure that leads to tension between the refugee communities and the host communities. In my opinion, youth are mostly affected because youth are often the ones who need to leave where they are, leave home, leave the shelter, and provide for the family. And if we care for the well-being and the livelihood of youth, their integration in the host community is key. And before we talk about scholarship program and what scholarship program can do internally and provide equal opportunities to host and refugee communities, I think it's important to also to say that we need to shift the framing of the problem from providing services and delivering services and providing support to community engagement and to finding together sustainable and durable solutions. This, in my opinion, is the way forward, especially that we are all dealing with protracted crisis. At the beginning, delivering services and support is extremely important, but when most of these conflicts are taking decades to be resolved, you have to also think about durable and sustainable solutions. Of course, providing equal opportunities for refugees and host communities when we offer scholarships at the beginning is key. But also, very important is the way you manage internally the system within the academic institution when you provide, when you have the diversity of students within. I'm going to talk about the American University of Beirut, my institution. So we have many scholarships for students from Lebanon, including Palestinian and Syrian refugees in Lebanon. But we also have scholarships for students who come from Afghanistan, young women from Afghanistan, and students who come from many countries on the African continent and other countries, of course. And being in a welcoming and inclusive campus in a safe environment also helps in fighting prejudice that young people come with, and building ties that would last beyond the graduation of these young people.
We lack these ties with the COVID-19 social distancing and stay at home, and I personally notice online that the conversation, the acceptance and the diversity is going really backwards, and I know this impacted us way beyond what we think of, but Dr. Husna Ahmad, how do you think this digitalization and this virtual world impacted women specifically?
Thank you. So as a Muslim, I'm taught that humans are stewards of this planet. It's a trust given to us by Allah, and we have the responsibility of preserving the natural order on earth and maintaining its balance, and must strive to ensure the fair allocation of resources. The pandemic has given us a chance to rethink all our assumptions and reimagine our world. With the climate crisis, we need to think about the scope and scale of human migration due to climate change, and how it will test the limits of national and global governance as well as international cooperation. So jobs and the labor market will change drastically. So the I can never pronounce this word, the digitalization process will only increase. So we need to act now to support all our youth and engage them to succeed in supporting the new era of jobs. Today there are 1.8 billion people between the ages of 10 to 24. They're the largest generation of youth in history. Close to 90% of the youth live in the global south, in the developing countries, where they make up a large proportion of the population. And 90% of the jobs today require some knowledge of digital technology. So what are the 3 key requirements that young women to be part of the digital transition and gain sustainable career paths? What are they? First, access to I'm going to give up on this.
Digitalization. We'll make a contest about it.
Number 2, training. And number 3, safeguarding online, because that is cyberbullying and all sorts of trolling and all sorts of things happen. So there are a lot of benefits from working, virtually. I work from my office at home, and this isn't only efficient in time and cost saving, but it makes it easier for me with my caring responsibilities for my mother and my children and my grandchildren. So resistance to remote or virtual working has always been about trust and accountability. But COVID has really tested this presumption, and I don't think we'll ever go back to working exclusively in our offices. So the hybrid method is working just fine. So virtual working should be, Rawaa, it should be a huge empowerment moment for women, but the reality is quite different. Barriers to accessing technology, a lack of division between work and home life, so there's no work-life balance, and working in confined spaces has resulted in a huge surge in domestic violence. So this is a reality for all women globally. But the interesting thing is that when you talk about digitalization, it can be a lifeline, and if we look at Africa, the ICT and digital sector has huge potential. With over 90,000 new internet users in Africa every day. Capitalizing on this would increase Africa's access to global markets. But the thing is that Africa currently has over 120 million active money mobile accounts, which is over 50% total worldwide. But, you know, the potential is $300 billion, dollars in African GDP by 2025. Women, where are they? They're not in the picture. That's the problem. And as my colleagues on the panel said, this is the reality that, they are the ones who are being left behind. Mm-hmm. But, only 1/3 of girls have access to internet, and, from my perspective, I think women are incredibly resilient. We've got a room full of women here as well as on the panel, and particularly women of faith are even more so. So what do we need? Investment, investment, investment.
Yes, and I have to say that one of my concerns with the digitalization is that despite it's going to open a lot of doors, and did open a lot of doors for women, but it's also closing a lot of doors because many women are going for hybrid or stay-at-home jobs, and this lack of interaction, direct interaction in the job market is going to limit them to very specific jobs. You don't get promoted without the PR and the constant presence within the hallway. So I'm not a very big fan of the hybrid system. Ms. Anna Martiningui, there is, of course, my own view that it's going to limit women a little bit, but it's going to open a lot of doors for women and for a new generation that can work digitally very fine. How does the EFE utilize this evolution in the work market to support the reskilling of job seekers into high demand opportunities, especially after the COVID-19?
Thank you. I think that the key here is exactly what you and Yannick mentioned before, is the market and its evolution. So for us, we follow the market's evolution in each country where we operate to create bespoke programs that can ensure that young people can access current and emerging opportunities. So we begin from the demand side. We identify the growth sectors within each country. Then we identify the companies that are in need of talent. We identify the skills that job seekers need to have to access those jobs. And then we adapt our trainings accordingly to be able to skill and reskill the workforce to make sure that young people are actually eligible for current high demand occupations. Now, while it's a fact that the working age population by far exceeds economy's capacities to create jobs, especially since COVID, with millions of jobs lost, there are positions that are in high need and remain unfilled. We have worked so far throughout the MENA with over 3,700 employers, and they always talk about the same thing. There's a skill mismatch. Digital skills, and this has become even more precedent since COVID, talk about employability, soft, technical skills as impediments to finding a qualified workforce, which is necessary to be productive, increase competitiveness, and stimulate companies' capacity to generate more jobs. And the gap is widening because the market is changing at such a fast pace that it's very difficult to keep up. So we provide trainings in precisely those skills connected to jobs. Now in sectors such as ICT, for example, it says very big virtual jobs, BPO, supply chain, the health sector, of course, the education sector, just to name a few. And another very important aspect on which we focus is entrepreneurship, which can actually open endless possibilities for youth. But if they are adequately prepared, and most importantly, they have access to financial services and digital financial services as well. There's about, I think, 90% of companies in the MENA are SMEs, and we can't forget that many very big companies today, they were once SMEs or started with only one entrepreneur. And finally, we have talked a lot here today about the inclusion of women, and I think entrepreneurship not only can provide endless opportunities for youth, but also for women, because it gives them that flexibility, that security to be able to better balance their work life, their professional life, with, as we all know, with life responsibilities, which have increased since COVID.
To everything you said, we have to add one big barrier in the MENA region, the mindset. So, Mr. Ibrahim Mustafadi, our parents, and still in my generation, everyone wants their kids to become doctors or engineers, and they might let it go if they become lawyers, but not really very much. So how can we change this mindset? There's a big gap. There's a big need in the market for people with technical skills, and the parents just go really crazy if you even mention it.
Just I want to give an example here. When I started simulated hospitality school, we have less than 2% of women participation, and when the whole hotel, and then today we have more than 45% women participation, and we have done this in many sectors, just by showing the parents, the women, how this job and the environment in the job itself. And this is one example, but let me go back into the future at scale. How we encourage women talent, how we can make it affordable, how we push generation to be in well-being and make all of that as a habit. The technology exists today. So technology can enable us by being smart and build the right partnership, because today if we want to teach relevant curriculum to the need of the market, the curriculum, the private sector and technology are moving very fast. How we can do that? We can do that if we partnership with the right employer, and we have the technology that enable us immediately to reflect that change bi-weekly, bi-monthly, to make sure that we are really teaching relevant curriculum and relevant thing to the market. And by using technology, we'll understand the behavior, we'll understand the needs, and the data will be accessible to the employer, and the opportunity will be accessible to the learner himself. And the future, the university, the way it will disappear. Like there is no way to stay as it is. There is the return on investment, the time, if the parents or not the parents, the youth, the new generation, they understand. For addressing your question exactly, we are addressing micro-credential and stackable. So you can learn and work, you can get a degree, diploma, all the way. But all of us in this room, if we don't upskill ourselves, we will be maybe out of jobs, or someone will take our job and we stay where we are. But what we have come up with is combine all what we have learned, and we'll work in a partnership to develop something that can make education affordable, women, smart jobs, import the best curriculum and partnership with employer, and export the best services to the world. Thank you.
I'm not going to be out of job. There will always be panels to moderate. Don't worry. Mr. Mina Akhtar, Mr. Ibrahim Mustafadi talked about the importance of learning. Now we do see a change in the mindset in the youth. They have so many ideas. They embrace being pioneers and being self-entrepreneurs, not like my generation who were even scared of the idea. But what are the essential foundational mechanisms that must be in place to support them turn these ideas, these innovative ideas, into actual self-employment or job opportunities?
Thank you very much, Rawaa, for the question, and very interesting observations from the panel that I really appreciate and agree with. So I think there are 4 things to support youth to transform their ideas into effective employment, including entrepreneurship and business development. First of all, we need to build their 21st century capacities and skill sets as job seekers and as entrepreneurs. And ideally, this can be done through the educational system. Education is a really important factor. So through our Regional Refugee Resilience Program, known as 3RP, jointly with UNHCR, we are supporting about 1.5 million students that are targeted through formal education, and over 90,000 environment needs to be conducive for youth to access jobs and to develop their entrepreneurship skills and develop their businesses. So in Jordan, in Sudan, in Somalia, UNDP is working with partners to simplify the business registration forms and processes, improve information about registration process, and looking at digitalizing registration forms and procedures as ways to enable a greater facilitation of this. You know, another element here is that a lot of youth are working in the informal sector, which is really challenging for the region. The numbers are really high. And we have to find ways to enable that transition from informality to formality so that they can get better services, better access to finance, and also greater social protection. And I think this needs a lot of work. The fourth point here is that access to financing for youth entrepreneurs is critical. This requires reducing collateral requirements. Youth and women often do not have a lot of financial assets that they can use in order to seek further financing. And this needs concessional capital to be provided, as well as guarantees for youth access to MSME finance and for business growth. All businesses need startup capital in order to be established and to grow. And this is really important for the Arab region. In Djibouti, in Tunisia, and in Morocco, for example, we are looking at barriers to finance, including working with microfinance, working with mobile money among rural entrepreneurs and women entrepreneurs, addressing the issue of mistrust of financial institutions, lack of knowledge about financial products, and how to access them. So these are some of the things that are needed. Overall, I would say that economic transformation is really needed in the region. For example, an ESQA study noted that the region is characterized by weak links between education, research, and production system, and that the business environment does not encourage innovation and startups. There is a dominance of state-owned and or well-connected large private sector firms that make it very hard for young, new businesses to emerge. And I think this needs to be addressed by the right kinds of policies by governments in the region to really put youth at the center and create that enabling environment. And I would like to say that this requires all partners coming together, because we all have different skills and different perspectives on the problem and different contributions that can be made. So I think it's not one organization that can do this, but I think we have to work in ways that are smarter with youth at the center. And one idea can be to support a capacity building and financing facility that is geared towards youth empowerment, that provides timely and efficient support to addressing these barriers. This can be supported by UNDP and other UN agencies, and with international financing institutions, private sector, donor governments, and NGOs and philanthropies. With COVID-19, we have seen the emergence of, quite a lot of lessons and innovative ideas as well. In particular, there is a need to focus on green jobs, green businesses that are fit for the future and resilient, and also for technology-oriented jobs. And I think with the virtual space and the digital space, we're seeing that distances can shrink and new and different kind of opportunities can emerge. And it's really important to take advantage of this for youth.
Thank you, Ms. Akhtar. When we talk about transforming economy, Mr. Yannick Du Pont, from your experience, there has to be a transformation in higher education as well. What is the best combination of higher education to prepare the youth today? If we can do it as fast as possible, because we're kind of running out of time.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think, what I think I hear from all panelists, and I would really concur with that, you need to start from the demand side. So I think it's very important for education institutions to first reflect on what are we educating for. And just not only the market, it's also the public sector, the health sector, but you need to know what is needed in 5 years from now. So I think starting with the market and working it back to your educational curricula, I think is essential. If traditional universities are able to make it or not, I'm not so sure. I think some won't, and I would concur with Ibrahim there, that some will just are not going to make the cut. Some will. I think some are adjusting, and some are, I think, also tickled by these innovative plans. I think you're also dragging the system along and making some dinosaurs wake up before they get extinct. So I think it's very important to disrupt that thinking from a demand perspective. The second thing, and I'm trying to keep that very short, but I think it's a very important point, I think we need to disrupt the aid system. And this system is still a Western-based funding system based on Western values, and I concur. And all the selection methods of where I draw my funding from are Western generated. And the sad truth is that me being a white man in a suit makes it far more easy to access major international funding from Western governments, the EU, the World Bank, just because I'm based there and because I'm a white man in a suit. And this has really struck me in my last 5 years in my job, that this needs to change. And so I think we also need to start demonstrating that locally driven development by local organizations, you know, actually is the way forward, and that is not only financial, because it's far more cost effective.
Of course.
But it's not about the money, it's about building sustainable development. And I think, maybe last sentence, I think if we look what happened in Afghanistan, I think this is the time to put this discussion forward, because I think we're going to see a paradigm shift. What happened after the fall of the Berlin Wall, parachuted Western intervention does not work. It's clearly failed, not only there, but in other places. So we need to rethink also development. We need to think, how can we build on local values with local partners and see international involvement as a temporary, transitionary, brokering function for developments, and move back to that original idea and move away from the more centralized Western-driven development model.
Which creates a lot of tension locally between communities within the communities when you focus on one side and not the other. You made the job of Maha Haidar extremely hard with both your comments about the end of universities. How will you be able to convince NGOs and donors to actually invest in higher education scholarships?
Well, since young people are at the heart of everything that we do, and since the focus of this summit is on to unmute this generation, I'm going to tell you the story of one of our students. Her name is Islam. She's a Syrian student who was forced to flee her country and the warmth of their home at the onset of the war when she was in her secondary, like finishing her secondary schooling. While other people her age were looking forward to the university experience and to higher education, she found herself in Lebanon with no prospects. Getting an education from an institution such as AUB, a private institution, was like a far-fetched dream. Islam today is a graduate of AUB with a BS in computer science. Through the MasterCard Foundation scholarship, she also took further training, is now helping the university, within the university, to work on online courses. But most importantly, she has been very active in her own community. She has supported many of her peers to find opportunities of higher education and other opportunities to build important skills. She's delivered workshops on, soft skills. She delivered English learning workshops, and she's not, one case in point. We have many other stories of young students from all around the world who are not only focusing on their personal growth, but who are working on very complex social issues, such as female genital mutilation in Africa, such as racism, such as women empowerment, such as mental health. These students, the power of their stories and the impact of their transformative journeys is what we should look at when we think about higher education. Of course, we can find data and evidence on linking higher education to economic development. But I think the stories show not only the impact of higher education scholarships, but also the commitment to the values of equity and inclusion, and the fact that everyone deserves a chance. In fact, people who have contributed to the development of humanity do not come from one social class, do not come from one race or one nationality. This is why, and we can speak, of course, of cost, and cost can be an issue. But the relationship, in my opinion, should not be a relationship between a donor and a service provider. It should be how do we say,
more philosophical.
No, not philosophical at all. It's a partnership.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is the word. So it's a partnership. To showcase, recently AUB has partnered with Al-Fakhoura and Education Above All to expand our scholarship offerings. And it's not only education that we want to work on, we want to together build a program that support these young people to build important skills through leadership training and civic engagement.
Exactly. I think this is the only way forward, by making the programs more up-to-date, faster enough, and not really by saying that the
No, I think we are reimagining the way we do education to make sure that we are not only educating, but we are supporting and we are nurturing and we are building agency so that these young people can be the agents of change and make a better world.
I can tell you from my own personal experience that I have 2 master's degrees. They weren't useful in my job application. No one really even realizes that I have 2 master's degrees. But I know how I think differently in the job, how my skills are way different from anyone else who didn't have those master's degrees. Not that I'm better, but I see how I'm more methodic in my approach. Quick round of questions and answers if you have some. We have the gentleman here, the young lady here, and the young lady here. Whoever has the mic first, and the lady here. The lady here, we have.
First of all, Assalamu alaikum. Ni'ma Ahmed, I'm a student from Al-Fakhura program from Education Organization. Gladly, alhamdulillah. First of all, great session. Thank you all for your very insightful observation. My question is more near, is close to my home country. I'm from Sudan, and maybe will be applicable for other unfortunate countries. Most of students there go to state schools or government school where it's barely safe and they don't have much money. And during the pandemic, when the whole universe went to digital education and most of the students there does not have access to internet, education almost stopped for a year or so, and life got harder, and students went to take jobs that whatever they can do, leaving education way back, and they kind of lost trust in the education system. My question is how we can actually rebuild their trust in the education and make them go back to pursue higher education.
Okay, can we pass the mic to the lady here while we see who would like to answer that? Yannick or Maha or Ibrahim? Maha.
I didn't particularly get the question at the end, so I mean the context. Yeah.
How can we get the youth to gain trust again in the education, considering that the economic situation is not really helping?
I think we had particular difficulty with a student from Sudan during the pandemic when we went online and he couldn't follow, right? So we became completely irrelevant as an education institution to someone who is registered but cannot follow our services. And this is a real problem. There are structural barriers that are beyond even sometimes the capacity of the institution. And I think we go back to reimagining our role as higher education institutions. And the most important is for us to be relevant to the students and to think also of relevance and of our role as not only for education and research, but for service. And so it is, I think, I throw it back at us in being flexible in the way we offer services for the youth so that we regain their trust and then have them more join education.
The lady here.
You know that many countries of the world face challenges in dealing with the issue of refugees. One of the most important of these challenges is the right of the refugee child to education. And Qatar actually has taken proactive steps to deal with this challenge internally. My question here is there a future plan to deal with the education of refugees in the event that their number increases in the future? And is there a plan to support the education of refugees, especially children refugees, in other countries, especially the Arab world?
I'm going to allow myself to answer this question. I'm sorry for that, but can we get the mic to the gentleman in the front? Because as Filippo Grande said in his word, There is an engagement by UNHCR to increase the number of child refugees who have access to education by 15% for higher education. And for the child level to primary and secondary, there is engagement. Do you have the number, Maha? But there is engagement actually for this. I know that Education Above All is working, since there's no one from Education Above All here to give you the numbers, but maybe later on Dalia can give the numbers. They worked on 10 million child across the world in conflict zones, but they have so many projects in Syria, in Lebanon, in Turkey, in host countries of the Syrian community, and in Sudan, in Somalia, in Palestine, Jordan. So the lady here, the young lady here.
Hi, this is Shahad Faleh from Qatar Foundation International, which is a non-profit grant-making organization in the state, and I'm based here. And I would like to say that I'm very privileged to have my job. But when I look around me and I look at my other friends who have so much skills and potential, and they're not just skills and potential and experience, but they're very connected with their purpose in life. Mr. Ibrahim talked about the mindset of students and how to build a mindset where they want to gain more skills, but we also need to look at the skills and the mindset and the culture in the organizations. So how can you as directors and CEOs shift the mindset of an organization to actually start not just looking at the experiences that they have, whether it's 12 years compared to a 2 years person who's applying to a job, but no, look at their purpose and if they're actually connected to the vision and mission of the company or the organization they're applying to. Thank you.
I would say the best person to answer that is Mr. Yannick Du Pont.
Let me just, one story. I think the best leader we had in Spark, one of the top 3, is actually Valentina Chari. She's from Kosovo. And she started working with us when she was 18, just after the war. And because we were just also a young organization, we were not able, or we were maybe also a bit older, we were maybe early 20s. So we actually did not look at long experience. So we've learned this actually. And then she grew and she drove the office to a level that is just unimaginable. I think it's become one of our best operations we had ever, was a Kosovo operation. And it was started by an 18-year-old woman, actually. So I fully agree with you. And I think what we need to do is we need to make sure that we position our, not just our own folks and our own hiring to value this. And we're trying to continue to do this. I think only in Spark, we only have 5% expats. I think there is only 6 Dutch in Spark. And everyone else is from the communities and mostly in their 20s. And then one of the main things I get back sometimes from the more, let's say, bigger aid organizations is, oh, you seem to have only interns. And I'm like, no. We are actually employing the very people we're serving. And that allows us to have also better service because they tell us much better what is in the mind of the community if you hire youth from the community to run your operations. So I think, but you're making a very valid point. I think this is something that we can only do by giving a concrete lead by example.
Mr. Safadi.
Like in the Arab world, WASTA, like all of that things.
Of course.
So what I have done in my new model is data, behavior, clear expectation. Like the behavior with the data, with expectation clear, that can do what you want at scale.
You should train more companies on acquiring that system.
Like it will be there, don't worry. Technology is getting fast, and you can see Abdurrahman, mashallah, shabab, like young leader in a country like Qatar, like it's there. But what I'm saying is, it's gonna come. The institution will not shift, it will be out. So don't rush. Come.
Last 2 questions. Last but not least, the gentleman here and the lady just after.
Yep. Thank you very much. Very interesting dialogue, discussion. But I personally think that there's been too much emphasis on higher education and scholarships. I come from a higher education background, but the reality on the ground is that if you want to address the deprivation of the deprived segments of communities, then I think you need to think at a bit lower level, although higher education is very important and this is needed, but much more impact of poverty elimination and human development would come from an integrated program of basic education with skill development or vocational training. Education above all, I think it's a typical example. I come from Pakistan Welfare Forum, we are a body partners with Education Above All. It's an excellent example that we are addressing the community development programs that is addressing the deprived segments of the community's problems through, for example, 5 schools we have here with the help of Education Above All and other partners, where we have a program of basic education and then let's say illiteracy removal or literacy programs integrated with vocational training, both for men and women, girls and boys. Okay. It's a beautiful program. Education above all also caters for higher education, and they have scholarships. But I think if we really want to address the real issues or issues at large, then we have to come a little bit at the lower level because it will have much more impact and much needed impact. Thank you.
But there are, go ahead, Maha. Meanwhile, can we pass the mic to the lady?
It should not be one at the expense of the other, and we believe in multiple pathways so that everyone finds an opportunity.
Dalia, how much time are you going to give me more for Q&As? We still have 3 questions, 4, 5. Come. Because we went overboard. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, I see. So, no? I'm very sorry, but we're here, so you can come to us and ask us the question directly. Yes. Can we?
Would that be possible? I'm going to, sorry, I'm cheating with that.
Yes, of course.
I'm using my WhatsApp.
Yeah. But we'll be here, so you come forward to us directly with the questions.
Well, thank you so much for this insightful panel discussion. My name is Badr, and I'm from Palestine, Gaza. I am also an alumnus of Education Above All's Al-Fakhura Scholarship Program. Indeed, like many speakers today have highlighted the crying need of providing soft skills to students and to youth. My question was, how can we ensure the sustainability of providing soft skills in all times, especially in the times of uncertainty? Thank you.
To whom does your question go?
Any speaker can answer this because many speakers mentioned it.
If Ms. Tamina Akhtar is still with us,
okay.
I think we lost her. So, go
like sustainability, the soft skills, any skills you need exist. Like the technology today, the providers is there, but is not, soft skills have to be embedded. Like when they say about well-being and sport and learning by doing it, it's all embedded. Okay, and then you have to become as a habits, and you have to work on yourself, mentally, physically, learn how to learn and make this as a habits. You will learn every day.
I'm sorry, but we have to close. Thank you very much, Ms. Tamina Akhtar from UNDP in New York, Yannick Du Pont from Spark here, Maha Haidar from MasterCard Scholarship AUB, Anna Martiningui online from Madrid, Education for Employment, and Ibrahim As-Safadi from Luminous Group, and Dr. Hasna Ahmad from Global One. Some of the answers and the questions that were in the end were still questioning what's the need of higher education in comparison with illiteracy programs. We have to bear in mind this number. 17 years is the average number of years that a refugee stays in a host community. Then they try to relocate, to go somewhere else. Higher education is the only actual chance they can have to break out of poverty cycle. We need to start, educate, and equip refugees in order to become assets rather than burdens, both in host community or in a third relocation community, or maybe when they go back to their permanent homes. Higher education plays an intricate role in the scalability of labor resources by supplying graduates with desired skills, whether it's university or training or technical. It does provide skills, especially that now education institutions are doing a lot of efforts to actually meet the market needs as fast as possible. For the stability and the growth of MENA region, we need to view higher education as a vehicle to bridge the gap between education and meaningful employment, because higher education might be a little bit irrelevant now in the States, but by the time our economies reach that level, we will still need it for at least 20 to 30 years. We should focus on social and economic empowerment through connecting youth to economic opportunities and placing them in meaningful jobs to remain competitive and thrive in the global labor market. Meaningful jobs like the story of my family. Now I have my aunt who's back in university at the age of 45 because she understood that a day-to-day job is not going to be providing sustainable livelihoods for their parents. So please support Silatech and Al-Fakhura, and I hope that all of you together will be doing a lot and great work to help more people, more young generation, to see their ideas come to life and have better lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It has been a huge pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Tamina.
Thank you. We'll be disconnecting now. Yeah, we'll move on
Bye.
to the rest of the day and the rest of the summit tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.